The champagne glass slipped from Victoria's fingers and shattered against the marble floor of the country club. The sound echoed through the dining room as every conversation stopped. Her husband Richard's voice carried clearly from the terrace outside. "Tell me again why I should stay married to that boring housewife when I could have you. Amanda Victoria hasn't been interesting in 20 years. Victoria Sterling stood frozen behind the French doors, her 52-year-old heart hammering against her ribs. The anniversary dinner she had planned for months suddenly felt like a cruel joke. 25 years of marriage, and this was how she discovered the truth. "She's so predictable," Richard continued, his voice slurred with expensive wine. "Same routine every day. Tennis at 9, lunch with those vapid friends, home by 4 to ask about my day like she actually understands business. God, Amanda, you're everything she's not. Young, ambitious, actually interesting to talk to." Amanda's laugh drifted through the glass. "Richard, darling, you deserve someone who appreciates your success. Victoria's just been coasting on your money for decades." Victoria's hands trembled as she gripped her purse. The emerald earrings Richard had given her that morning suddenly felt heavy against her neck. A celebration of their silver anniversary, he had said, a symbol of their enduring love. "The divorce will be simple," Richard was saying. "I've already spoken to my attorney. Victoria signed that prenup 25 years ago without reading it. She'll get enough to live comfortably. Nothing more. Then you and I can finally be together properly." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Divorce, attorney, prenup. How long had this been planned? How many dinner parties had she hosted where Amanda had sat at their table, smiling at Victoria while planning to steal her life? "What about her finding out about the other money?" Amanda asked, her voice dropping lower. "She doesn't know about any of that," Richard replied confidently. "Victoria's never shown interest in finances. She has no idea what she's entitled to. It's better this way." Victoria pressed closer to the glass, straining to hear. "Other money. What other money?" "Poor little housewife," Amanda cooed. "She probably thinks she's completely dependent on you." "Because she is," Richard laughed. "Or she thinks she is. It's amazing what people don't know about their own lives when someone else handles everything for them." Victoria stepped back from the door, her mind reeling. 25 years of marriage, and she was nothing more than a joke to them. A boring, predictable housewife who didn't even understand her own financial situation. She looked around the dining room where she had celebrated every major milestone of her adult life. Anniversary dinners, birthday parties, business celebrations. The same country club where Richard had proposed 26 years ago, promising her a lifetime of love and partnership. "Victoria." The hostess approached with a concerned expression. "Are you all right? Dear, you look pale." "I'm fine," Victoria managed, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "Just need some air." She walked past the curious stares of other diners, their whispered conversations following her to the entrance. Everyone probably knew about Richard and Amanda. Victoria was likely the last to find out about her own husband's affair. The valet brought her car around, the silver Mercedes that Richard had bought her for her 50th birthday. Another symbol of his generosity, his love, his care for her comfort. Now it felt like evidence of her dependence, her complete reliance on a man who saw her as nothing more than an obligation. Victoria drove home through the winding roads of Westchester County, past the manicured lawns and elegant homes of their exclusive neighborhood, houses where other wives lived, hopefully in marriages more honest than hers had apparently been. Their mansion came into view, the Georgian colonial that had been her pride and joy for 15 years. She had spent months choosing every piece of furniture, every paint color, every garden plant. Now it felt like a beautiful prison she had decorated herself. Victoria parked in the circular driveway and sat in the darkness, staring at the house where she had believed herself happy. The automatic lights illuminated the front entrance, casting long shadows across the perfectly maintained landscape. She thought about calling someone. Her sister lived in California, too far away to offer immediate comfort. Her few close friends were all wives of Richard's business associates. How could she explain that she had just discovered her entire marriage was a lie? Victoria grabbed her purse and walked toward the house, each step echoing like a countdown to the end of everything she thought she knew about her life. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out what came next. Tonight, she just needed to survive the realization that the last 25 years had been built on deception. The front door felt heavier than usual as she pushed it open. The crystal chandelier in the foyer cast familiar patterns on the walls, but everything looked different now. This wasn't her home anymore. It was the house where she had been kept comfortable while her husband planned her disposal. Victoria climbed the stairs to their bedroom, wondering if Richard would come home tonight or stay with Amanda. Either way, she needed to start planning. Margaret Chen, the divorce attorney whose card she had kept hidden in her jewelry box for 2 years, was going to get a call first thing in the morning. As she reached the landing, Victoria paused to look at the family photos lining the hallway. Wedding pictures, vacation shots, images of a happy couple building a life together. All lies, she realized now. Or at least, lies on his part. But something Amanda had said nagged at her. What other money had they discussed? Victoria had never paid attention to their finances beyond her monthly allowance and credit cards. Richard had always handled investments, taxes, business matters. He said it was too complicated for her to worry about. Now she wondered what else Richard had deemed too complicated for his boring, predictable wife to understand. Tomorrow, she would start finding out. Tonight, she would plan her escape from the beautiful cage she had never realized she was in. Victoria walked into her bedroom and closed the door behind her. For the first time in 25 years, she was truly alone. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than contentment. She felt angry. The front door of their Westchester mansion slammed behind Victoria with such force that the crystal chandelier in the foyer trembled. She had been sitting in the living room since 10 o'clock, practicing what she would say when Richard finally came home. Now, at 12:30 in the morning, she heard his unsteady footsteps on the marble floor. "Victoria, darling, you're still awake." Richard's voice carried the casual tone of a man who believed himself completely safe from discovery. He appeared in the doorway of the living room, loosening his tie with the satisfied air of someone who had just concluded successful business. "I heard everything at the club tonight." "Richard." Victoria remained seated in the wingback chair that faced the entrance, her hands folded in her lap with deceptive calm. Richard's movements stilled for just a moment before he continued removing his cufflinks. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. The acoustics in that place are terrible. You probably misheard something. I heard you telling Amanda how boring and predictable I am. I heard you discussing our divorce and how I signed a prenup without reading it. I heard you planning your new life with your secretary." The cufflinks clattered onto the side table as Richard finally looked directly at her. In the lamplight, Victoria could see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing denial against admission, strategy against impulse. "Well," he said finally, straightening his shoulders, "I suppose it's time we had this conversation." Victoria had expected denial, anger, or at least some attempt at justification. Richard's immediate shift to matter-of-fact discussion felt like another slap. Even now, caught in betrayal, he maintained complete control of the situation. "How long?" she asked quietly. "With Amanda?" "About 18 months. But Victoria, you have to understand, this isn't about you personally. We've simply grown apart. People change. Marriages run their course. I'm not the villain here. You're leaving me for your 28-year-old secretary, and I'm supposed to see this as a natural evolution." Richard moved to the bar cart and poured himself a scotch, his movements deliberate and calm. "Amanda and I have a connection that you and I lost years ago. She understands my work, my ambitions. She's intellectually stimulating in ways that, frankly, you haven't been for some time." The casual cruelty of his words settled around Victoria like a heavy blanket. This was Richard without pretense, without the careful consideration he usually showed in public. This was what he really thought of her. "And what about our marriage vows, 25 years of promises? Victoria, be realistic. You've been essentially retired from our marriage for years. You play tennis, you lunch with friends, you manage the household staff. It's a pleasant life, but it's not a partnership. Amanda and I are partners." Richard sat down across from her, his expression becoming almost gentle, as if he were explaining something complicated to a child. "Look, I'm not going to leave you destitute. You'll have enough money to maintain a comfortable lifestyle, a nice condo somewhere, maybe in the city. You can take art classes, travel, whatever women your age do when they finally have freedom." "Women my age," Victoria repeated slowly. You mean divorced women whose millionaire ex-husbands decided they were too boring to keep around? Don't be dramatic. This is a business transaction at this point. We'll handle it cleanly, quietly. My attorney will contact you next week with the settlement offer. I think you'll find it quite generous. Victoria studied her husband's face, searching for any sign of the man she had married 26 years ago. Richard had always been ambitious, sometimes ruthless in business. But she had believed that with her, he was different. She had been wrong about that too. "What if I don't want a divorce?" she asked. Richard's laugh was not unkind, but it was dismissive. "Victoria, darling, what would be the point? We both know this marriage has been over for years. We've just been going through the motions. Now we can both move on to something real?" "Something real with Amanda." "Yes, with Amanda. She's pregnant. Victoria, we're going to have a family together." The words hit Victoria like ice water. A baby. Richard was 55 years old, starting over with a woman young enough to be his daughter, planning the family he had always claimed he didn't want with Victoria. "You said you didn't want children," she whispered. "I didn't want children with someone who would have been a reluctant mother. Amanda wants to build something with me. She's excited about our future in a way that you never were about ours." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. Not just heartbreak, but something harder and sharper. Rage, perhaps, or determination. She had spent 25 years being the perfect wife, creating a perfect home, supporting his perfect career, and his response was to replace her with someone who would do it better. "You think I'll just sign your papers and disappear quietly? I think you'll do what's best for everyone involved. Fighting this will only make it more expensive and more public. Do you really want to drag this through the courts? Do you want everyone in Westchester County discussing your personal business?" Richard stood up, smoothing his hair with the gesture she had once found endearing. Now it looked like preening. "I'll be staying at the Waldorf until this is settled. You can reach me through my attorney if you need anything. Try to think rationally about this. Victoria, this is an opportunity for both of us to start fresh." He walked toward the stair and then paused and turned back. "Oh, and Victoria, I'd appreciate it if you didn't make this more difficult than necessary. Amanda doesn't deserve to be dragged into our marital problems." Victoria watched him climb the stairs to pack his things, his footsteps confident and unhurried. Even in betrayal, Richard maintained the assumption that everything would proceed according to his plans. As she heard him moving around in their bedroom, Victoria sat alone in the dark living room, her mind racing. She had two choices: become the victim he expected, or become someone he never saw coming. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 1 o'clock in the morning. Richard would be gone within the hour, off to start his new life with his pregnant girlfriend, while Victoria figured out how to rebuild her world from scratch. But something nagged at her from the conversation she had overheard earlier. Amanda asking about the other money and Richard's confident response that Victoria didn't know about any of that. What other money? What else had her husband been hiding from his boring, predictable wife? Tomorrow, she would start finding out. Tonight, she would plan her strategy. Richard Sterling had just made the mistake of underestimating the woman he was discarding. As Richard's footsteps moved down the stairs with his suitcase, Victoria remained motionless in her chair. The front door closed behind him with a final click, leaving her alone in the house they had shared for 15 years. She sat in the silence until dawn broke through the windows, already planning her first call to Margaret Chen. Richard thought he was disposing of a helpless housewife. He was about to discover what happened when a woman had nothing left to lose. 3 days later, Victoria sat across from divorce attorney Margaret Chen in a glass office overlooking Manhattan. The city sprawled below them, busy and indifferent to the personal dramas playing out in law offices across its towers. "Mrs. Sterling, I'll be direct with you." Margaret's voice was crisp and professional, cutting through pleasantries with surgical precision. "Your husband filed first, which gives him certain advantages. However, the prenuptial agreement you signed 25 years ago has some interesting clauses that may work in your favor." Victoria shifted in the leather chair, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Margaret Chen had been recommended by a friend's sister as the best divorce attorney in the city, someone who specialized in complex financial cases involving wealthy men and their discarded wives. "What kind of clauses?" "Infidelity voids several of the financial limitations. If we can prove your husband's affair, You're entitled to a much larger settlement than he's probably expecting. Margaret pulled a thick folder from her desk. Tell me about your assets. What do you know about your husband's business? Investments? Properties? Victoria felt heat creep up her neck. I'm afraid I don't know much about our finances. Richard always handled everything. He gave me an allowance for household expenses and personal spending, but I never saw tax returns or investment statements. Monthly allowance of how much? $15,000. Margaret's eyebrow raised slightly. For household expenses and personal spending, what about the business Richard Sterling Enterprises is worth approximately $50 million according to public filings? The number hit Victoria like a physical blow. $50 million. She had known Richard was successful, but the magnitude of their wealth had never been real to her. It was just comfort, security, the ability to buy what she wanted without worrying about cost. Mrs. Sterling, in marriages involving this level of wealth, wives typically have much more financial knowledge. How long has Richard controlled all the money decisions? Since we were married, he said finance was too complicated for me to worry about, that I should focus on making our home beautiful and let him handle the business side. Margaret made notes on a yellow pad, her expression carefully neutral. And you never questioned this arrangement. Victoria felt defensive, then angry at feeling defensive. I trusted my husband. I thought that's what marriage was supposed to be. Partnership, with each person handling what they did best. Mrs. Sterling, in my experience, men who insist on total financial control usually have something to hide. I'm going to recommend we hire a private investigator to look into your husband's affairs, both romantic and financial. The word affairs hung in the air between them. Victoria wondered how many other women had sat in this chair, discovering that their trust had been weaponized against them. How much will this cost? My retainer is $50,000. The investigator will be additional? Do you have access to that amount? Victoria's checking account had $8,000. Her savings account had $12,000. Money she had accumulated from her allowance over the years, mostly for gifts and charitable donations. I don't have $50,000 readily available. Margaret leaned forward. Mrs. Sterling, if your husband controls all the money and you need money to fight him, we have a problem. Unless, she paused in studying Victoria's face. Is there any family money inheritance, trust funds, anything separate from your husband's business? No, I don't think so. My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my grandmother, but she passed away 15 years ago. What was your grandmother's name? Eleanor Montenegro. But she wasn't wealthy. She lived modestly, worked in the hospitality industry. Margaret's pen stopped moving. She looked up sharply. Eleanor Montenegro, the casino owner. Victoria stared at her. Casino owner. No, my grandmother worked for casinos, but she didn't own them. She was in management or something like that. Margaret was already typing on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. After a moment, she turned the screen toward Victoria. Mrs. Sterling, your grandmother Eleanor Montenegro owned 3 casinos in Atlantic City. Montenegro Enterprises was valued at approximately $60 million when she died 15 years ago. The words on the screen blurred as Victoria tried to process what she was reading. Obituary for Eleanor Montenegro, businesswoman and casino magnate, survived by 1 granddaughter, Victoria Montenegro Sterling. That's impossible. Richard would have told me if I inherited anything significant. Margaret's expression shifted from professional neutrality to something harder. Mrs. Sterling, who handled your grandmother's estate? Richard did. He said it was just paperwork, that there wasn't much to settle. He took care of everything so I didn't have to deal with it during my grief. And you never saw any documents, never spoke to your grandmother's attorney? Victoria shook her head, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. Richard said it would be too painful for me, that he would handle all the legal details. Margaret picked up her phone and dialed a number. James, it's Margaret Chen. I need you to look up the Montenegro estate from 15 years ago. Eleanor Montenegro died September 2009. What happened to Montenegro Enterprises? Victoria watched Margaret's face change as she listened to the response. When she hung up, her expression was grim. Mrs. Sterling, your husband has been acting as executor of your grandmother's estate for 15 years. Montenegro Enterprises is still operating, still profitable. According to public records, the casino properties are held in trust for Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter. The room seemed to tilt around Victoria. You're saying I own casinos. I'm saying your husband has been controlling your inheritance for 15 years without your knowledge. The trust generates approximately $5 million in income annually. Money that legally belongs to you. Victoria gripped the arms of her chair. $5 million a year. For 15 years. Money that should have been hers. Money that Richard had hidden from her while giving her a monthly allowance like a child. How is that legal? If you signed documents giving him power of attorney over the estate, it's technically legal. But Mrs. Sterling, you should have been informed about the inheritance. You should have been receiving the income. Richard told me my grandmother left me some personal items in a small savings account. He said the rest went to charity. Margaret's jaw tightened. Your husband has been stealing from you for 15 years, and now he's trying to divorce you before you discover what you actually own. Victoria stared out at the Manhattan skyline, her mind reeling. She wasn't a dependent housewife after all. She was a wealthy woman who had been kept ignorant of her own fortune by the man she trusted most. What do we do now? Margaret smiled for the first time since Victoria had entered her office. Now we call James Wilson, the attorney who's been waiting 15 years to meet you, and then we introduce your husband to the woman he never knew he married. Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope, but power. Richard had built his strategy around her helplessness. He was about to learn that his boring, predictable wife was worth twice what he was, and she was furious. Margaret, I want you to understand something. Richard Sterling has controlled every aspect of my life for 25 years. He's hidden my inheritance, planned my disposal, and replaced me with a younger woman while living off money that belonged to me. Victoria stood up, her voice steady and clear. I want him destroyed. Margaret Chen smiled wider. Mrs. Sterling, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, jolting Victoria from her first peaceful sleep in weeks. She fumbled for the receiver in the master bedroom that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. Mrs. Sterling, this is Tom Rodriguez, the private investigator. Ms. Chen hired. I have some preliminary findings about your husband that I think you need to hear immediately. Victoria sat up in bed, her heart already racing. Tom's voice was warm and reassuring, but the urgency in his tone sent adrenaline coursing through her system. What did you find? Richard Sterling Enterprises has serious financial problems. Your husband owes approximately $12 million to various creditors, and his business assets have been declining for the past 3 years. He's been covering losses with aggressive borrowing. Victoria pressed the phone closer to her ear. You mean he's broke? Worse than broke, Mrs. Sterling. He's desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. There's more. Amanda Chen, his secretary, isn't just some young woman looking for security. Her family owns Chen Restaurant Group, worth about $30 million. She's not marrying him for money. Then why is she marrying him? That's what I'm still investigating. But Mrs. Sterling, your husband has been moving money offshore for the past 6 months. Large amounts, in ways that suggest he's preparing for something big. Victoria got out of bed and walked to the window. Looking out at the perfectly manicured grounds of the estate she now realized she had been paying for without knowing it. Tom, I need to understand something. If Richard's business is failing and he owes money, why would a wealthy woman want to marry him? That's the question that's been keeping me up all night. Mrs. Sterling, I'm going to keep digging, but I wanted you to know that this situation is more complicated than a simple affair and divorce. After Tom hung up, Victoria made coffee in the kitchen that still felt like a stage set for a life that had never been real. She needed to understand more about her grandmother's casinos, about the money that had been hidden from her, about the life she had been living without realizing it. At 9 o'clock, she drove to the Westchester County Library, an imposing brick building where she had never needed to conduct research before. The reference librarian, a small woman in her 70s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, approached Victoria at the computer terminal. Can I help you find something? Dear, I'm trying to research my family history. My grandmother owned businesses that I didn't know about, and I'm trying to understand what happened. Mrs. Patterson, according to her name tag, settled into the chair beside Victoria, with the air of someone who had helped countless people uncover family secrets. "What was your grandmother's name?" "Eleanor Montenegro. She died 15 years ago." Mrs. Patterson's face lit up. "Eleanor Montenegro. Oh, my dear, your grandmother was quite a remarkable woman. She built those casinos from nothing, you know. Started as a cocktail waitress in Atlantic City in the 1970s and ended up owning half the boardwalk." Victoria stared at the elderly librarian. "You knew my grandmother. Not personally, but her story was legendary among women of my generation. Eleanor Montenegro was proof that a woman could build an empire if she was smart enough and tough enough. She never married, never had children except for your mother. Devoted her whole life to building something that would last." Mrs. Patterson's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up newspaper articles and business records that painted a picture of Victoria's grandmother that bore no resemblance to the quiet woman she remembered visiting occasionally during her childhood. "Look at this," Mrs. Patterson said, pointing to a photograph from 1995. "Eleanor at the opening of her third casino. She was 70 years old and still expanding her business." Victoria studied the photograph. Her grandmother stood in front of a gleaming casino entrance, wearing an elegant black dress and a confident smile. She looked powerful, successful, completely in control of her world. "I don't understand. When I was growing up, she seemed so modest. She lived in a small apartment, drove an old car. Oh, that was Eleanor's way. She never flaunted her wealth. Said it made people treat you differently when they knew you had money. She preferred to be underestimated." Victoria felt a chill of recognition. She had been underestimated her entire marriage, and now she was discovering that perhaps it ran in the family. "Mrs. Patterson, do you know anything about what happened to her businesses when she died?" The librarian's expression grew concerned. "Well, that's where the story gets sad. Dear, Eleanor tried for years to reconnect with your mother, and later with you. She wanted to pass on her legacy, to teach you about the business. But your mother was never interested. And after your mother died, Eleanor said your husband prevented any contact." Victoria's chest tightened. "My husband prevented contact. Eleanor came to the library several times in her last years, trying to find ways to reach you. She was very worried about your future, said she didn't trust the man you had married. She set up the trust to protect you, but she was afraid you'd never know about it." Victoria stared at the computer screen, which now showed an article about Eleanor Montenegro's death. The obituary mentioned her granddaughter Victoria Sterling, but gave no details about the estate or the business succession. "Mrs. Patterson, my husband told me my grandmother left me some personal items and a small savings account. He said everything else went to charity." The elderly woman's face hardened. "That's a lie, dear. Eleanor Montenegro would never have left her life's work to charity when she had a granddaughter to inherit it. She built that empire for you." Victoria spent the next 2 hours reading everything the library had about her grandmother's business empire. Montenegro Enterprises owned 3 profitable casinos, several restaurants, and significant real estate holdings in Atlantic City. Eleanor had been a shrewd businesswoman who had parlayed her knowledge of the hospitality industry into a fortune that supported hundreds of employees. As Victoria prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Dear, I don't know what your situation is with your husband, but I remember something Eleanor said the last time I saw her. She said men who try to control women usually do it because they're afraid of what we're capable of when we realize our own power." Victoria drove home through the autumn afternoon, her mind spinning with new information about her family and her inheritance. Her grandmother had built an empire and tried to leave it to her, but Richard had intercepted everything, keeping Victoria ignorant while he controlled her money. When she reached the mansion, Victoria sat in her car for a moment, looking at the house with new eyes. This wasn't Richard's successful purchase. This was her inheritance money, filtered through her husband's control back to her in the form of a beautiful prison. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw the engagement announcement in today's paper? Congratulations to the happy couple, a friend." Victoria's hands shook as she opened her laptop and searched for engagement announcements. There it was in the society section of the New York Times. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, announces his engagement to Amanda Chen, daughter of restaurateur David Chen. The wedding is planned for next month at the Plaza Hotel. Next month. Richard wasn't just leaving her quickly. He was erasing her, replacing her so fast that the ink was barely dry on the separation papers. Victoria stared at the engagement photo, Richard and Amanda smiling at the camera, both of them radiating confidence and success. Richard looked younger, revitalized by his new relationship. Amanda looked triumphant, like a woman who had won a valuable prize. But Victoria now knew something they didn't know she knew. She wasn't a discarded housewife. She was Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter, and she owned an empire that neither of them had counted on. Tomorrow, she would meet with James Wilson, the attorney who had been waiting 15 years to give her control of her inheritance. Tonight, she would plan her strategy for the war Richard had started without realizing who he was fighting. Victoria walked into the house that had been bought with her money and furnished with her inheritance. Every room looked different now that she understood how it had been paid for. She wasn't living in Richard's generosity. She was living in her own wealth, carefully hidden from her by the man she had trusted with everything. Richard Sterling was about to discover that his boring, predictable wife had inherited something much more dangerous than money. She had inherited Eleanor Montenegro's determination and 25 years of anger to fuel it. Victoria's hands trembled as she opened the certified letter from Richard's attorney. The thick envelope had been waiting for her when she returned from her morning tennis game, sitting on the hall table like an elegant threat. Inside, legal documents outlined Richard's settlement offer in language so clinical it made their 25-year marriage sound like a failed business venture. Alimony of $20,000 per month for 5 years, half the value of the house, to be paid when it's sold. No claim to Richard Sterling Enterprises or any business assets. Generous terms for an amicable dissolution, the cover letter explained. Please have your attorney review and respond within 10 business days. Victoria set the papers aside and poured herself coffee, her mind already working through the implications. Richard was moving fast, trying to conclude their divorce before she had time to discover what she was entitled to. He had no idea she already knew about the casinos. At 2 o'clock, she drove to Manhattan for her meeting with James Wilson, the attorney who had been managing her grandmother's estate. His office occupied the 42nd floor of a building near Central Park, with windows that looked out over the city her grandmother had conquered through sheer determination. James Wilson was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When Victoria entered his office, he stood immediately and extended both hands to greet her. Victoria, I've been waiting 15 years to meet you properly. Mr. Wilson, I have to confess that I'm completely confused about my grandmother's estate. My husband told me there wasn't much to inherit. James gestured for Victoria to sit in a leather chair facing his desk. Your grandmother, Eleanor Montenegro, owned 3 casinos in Atlantic City when she died. Montenegro Enterprises was valued at approximately $60 million at that time. Today, it's worth closer to $100 million. The numbers hit Victoria like a physical force. $100 million. She owned $100 million and had been living on a $15,000 monthly allowance from her millionaire ex-husband. How was that possible? Why didn't I know? James pulled a thick file from his desk drawer. When your grandmother died, she left explicit instructions that you were to inherit everything upon your 30th birthday. However, if you were married at that time, the inheritance was to be held in trust until you either divorced or reached the age of 55. She didn't trust my marriage. Eleanor was concerned about your husband's influence over you. She suspected he might try to control the inheritance for his own purposes. The trust was designed to protect you. Victoria felt a surge of gratitude for a grandmother she had barely known. Eleanor Montenegro had seen through Richard's charm 25 years before Victoria herself had understood what kind of man she had married. What happened when I turned 30 or when I turned 50 last year? James's expression grew uncomfortable. Your husband, acting as your representative, requested that the trust continue. He claimed you weren't interested in managing business affairs and preferred that he handle all financial matters. I never said that. Richard never even told me there was a trust. Mrs. Sterling, I wrote to you personally on your 30th, 40th, and 50th birthdays, explaining the inheritance and offering to meet with you. Did you never receive those letters? Victoria shook her head, anger building in her chest. Richard handles all our mail. He said it was more efficient that way. James handed her a folder containing copies of his letters. Victoria read her grandmother's words, reaching across the years from beyond death. Victoria, I built this empire for our family. I want you to understand that you never have to depend on anyone else for your security. You have the power to control your own destiny." Tears stung Victoria's eyes. Her grandmother had tried to give her independence, and Richard had stolen it by intercepting every communication. "Mr. Wilson, what exactly do I own?" "3 casino properties in Atlantic City, Montenegro's Grand Montenegro's Palace and Montenegro's Boardwalk, plus several restaurants, a hotel, and significant real estate holdings. The casinos generate approximately $8 million in annual profit." Victoria stared at James, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what she was learning. She wasn't just wealthy. She was wealthy enough to buy and sell men like Richard Sterling. "Who's been running the businesses?" "Patricia Santos has been general manager for the past 10 years. She worked closely with your grandmother and has kept the operations profitable and growing. She's been asking to meet with you for years." Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, she glanced at it and felt her blood turn cold. "Richard, Victoria, I'm at the office with Amanda finalizing some details. We'll be by the house later to collect my remaining things. Please don't make this difficult." He was coming to the house with Amanda to collect his things like their marriage was just a business arrangement being dissolved. "Mr. Wilson, I need to ask you something confidential. If I wanted to take immediate control of my inheritance, what would that require? Simply signing these documents, transferring control from the trust to you personally? You've been the legal owner all along. The trust was just a management structure." Victoria looked at the papers that would give her control of a $100 million empire. 2 signatures, and she would be more powerful than Richard had ever been. "If I sign these, when would the transfer be effective?" "Immediately. By 5 o'clock today, you would have complete control of Montenegro Enterprises." Victoria picked up the pen and signed her name with a flourish. "Mr. Wilson, I'd like to meet Patricia Santos as soon as possible, and I want to see my casinos." "Of course, I should mention, Patricia has been very concerned about some inquiries she's received recently. Someone has been asking questions about the business operations, the financial structure, the ownership situation." "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind that suggests someone is researching whether Montenegro Enterprises might be for sale or vulnerable to a takeover." Victoria felt ice in her veins. "Who's been making these inquiries?" "A law firm that represents Sterling Enterprises." Victoria stared at James Wilson as the full scope of Richard's betrayal became clear. He hadn't just been hiding her inheritance. He had been preparing to steal it. The divorce, the quick settlement offer, the pressure to sign papers without reviewing them. Richard was planning to take control of her casinos and merge them with his failing business. "Mr. Wilson, my husband's business is in financial trouble. If he had gained control of my inheritance through the divorce, could he have used it to save his company?" "Absolutely. $100 million in profitable casino assets would have solved any financial problems Sterling Enterprises might have." Victoria stood up, her mind racing with the implications. Richard wasn't leaving her for Amanda's youth and beauty. He was leaving her to steal her inheritance and save his failing business empire. Amanda wasn't a trophy wife. She was part of a business plan. "I need to get to Atlantic City immediately." "Victoria, are you all right? You look pale." "Mr. Wilson, my husband has been planning to steal everything my grandmother built. He's been setting up this divorce to gain control of assets I didn't even know I owned. I need to see my properties and make sure they're secure." James stood as well, his expression grave. "I'll call Patricia Santos and let her know you're coming. Victoria, your grandmother would be very proud of the woman you're becoming." Victoria gathered the documents that proved her ownership of an empire and headed for the elevator. She had thought Richard was discarding her because she was boring and predictable. Instead, he was discarding her because she was worth $100 million, and he needed her money to save his failing business. The elevator descended toward the parking garage, carrying Victoria toward a confrontation she finally understood. Richard hadn't fallen out of love with her. He had never loved her at all. She had been a means to an end from the beginning, and now that end was finally within his reach. But Richard Sterling had made a crucial mistake. He had underestimated Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter, and Victoria was about to show him exactly what kind of woman he had been married to for 25 years without ever really knowing. The law offices of Montenegro Enterprises occupied an entire floor of a Manhattan skyscraper Victoria had never noticed before. As the elevator carried her to the 38th floor, she felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole into a world that belonged to her, but felt completely foreign. James Wilson met her at the reception area, his distinguished voice carrying a slight Boston accent that somehow made everything feel more official and important. "Victoria, before we proceed, I want you to understand the magnitude of what your grandmother built. Eleanor Montenegro started with nothing and created one of the most successful casino operations on the East Coast." They walked through hallways lined with photographs of Atlantic City's evolution from struggling seaside town to gaming destination. Victoria stopped at a picture of her grandmother cutting a ribbon at what appeared to be a casino opening. "She looks so confident," Victoria murmured. Eleanor was confident. She understood that in business, especially for women, perception is reality. If you project strength and competence, people treat you accordingly. If you project uncertainty, they take advantage. James led Victoria into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. On the table were financial statements, property deeds, and business reports that represented 15 years of hidden success. "Your inheritance includes controlling stakes in 3 casino properties. Montenegro's Grand is the flagship property, opened in 1988. Montenegro's Palace opened in 1993, and Montenegro's Boardwalk opened in 2001. Just 8 years before your grandmother's death." Victoria studied the financial reports, surprised to find that she could understand them more easily than she had expected. The numbers told a story of steady growth, smart reinvestment, and careful management. "These properties generate approximately $8 million in annual profit." "That's correct. Your grandmother was conservative in her expansion, always ensuring each property was stable and profitable before opening the next. She believed in building something that would last rather than growing quickly and risking everything." James handed Victoria a sealed envelope marked with her name in her grandmother's handwriting. "Eleanor left this for you, to be opened when you took control of the inheritance." Victoria's hands shook slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Her grandmother's voice seemed to speak from the pages. "My dear Victoria, if you are reading this, then you have finally learned the truth about what belongs to you. I built Montenegro Enterprises for our family, for the women who would come after me. I never married because I saw how marriage could trap women in dependence. But I hoped you would be stronger than I was, that you would find love without losing yourself. If your husband has hidden this inheritance from you, it means I was right to worry about his intentions. Victoria, you have the blood of survivors in your veins. Our family came to America with nothing and built something that will last for generations. Don't let anyone convince you that you are not capable of running this business. You are Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter, and that means you are stronger than you know." Victoria looked up to find James watching her with kind eyes. "She really built all this for me, for you and for the idea of what you could become. Eleanor used to say that women need to own things, not just live off the generosity of men. She wanted you to have the security that comes from controlling your own destiny." Victoria walked to the window and looked out at the city where her grandmother had made her fortune. Below, people moved through their lives, most of them probably unaware that the woman standing 40 floors above them had just inherited an empire. "James, I need to understand something. My husband has been acting as my representative for 15 years. What exactly has he been doing with the business income?" James's expression grew uncomfortable. "The income from the casinos has been deposited into accounts controlled by your husband. Legally, as your representative, he had the authority to manage the money as he saw fit. How much money are we talking about?" James consulted a thick ledger. "Over 15 years, approximately $120 million in profits have been generated by your properties." Victoria felt dizzy. $120 million. Richard had been collecting her inheritance money for 15 years, while giving her a monthly allowance and making her feel grateful for his generosity. "Where is that money now?" "According to the records your husband has provided, it's been reinvested in various business ventures. Sterling Enterprises has been the primary recipient of the investments." Victoria understood now. Richard hadn't just been hiding her inheritance. He had been using it to fund his own business empire. Sterling Enterprises had been built with Montenegro money, and now that Richard's business was failing, he needed to take direct control of the casinos to save himself. "James, what happens if I want to audit where that money went? As the owner of Montenegro Enterprises, You have every right to a complete accounting. In fact, I've been requesting detailed financial reports from your husband for years. He's been reluctant to provide them. Victoria's phone buzzed with another text from Richard. We'll be at the house at 6 p.m. with Amanda. Please have my golf clubs ready. The casual arrogance of the message infuriated her. Richard was treating their divorce like a minor inconvenience. Confident that he had successfully managed her ignorance for 25 years and could continue doing so through the settlement. James, I want to see my casinos immediately, and I want to meet Patricia Santos. Of course, I should warn you. Patricia has been asking difficult questions about the business operations lately. She's noticed some irregularities in the financial reporting. What kind of irregularities? Money being transferred out of casino operating accounts without her authorization. Payments to Sterling Enterprises that she can't account for. Patricia is a very thorough manager, and she's been concerned about activities that seem designed to weaken the casino operations. Victoria felt a chill of understanding. Richard wasn't just planning to steal her inheritance through the divorce. He had been systematically weakening her businesses to make them easier to acquire or merge with his failing company. How soon can we get to Atlantic City? My car is waiting downstairs. We can be there in 2 hours. Victoria gathered the documents that proved her ownership of Montenegro Enterprises and headed for the elevator. 25 years of marriage were ending, but something much more important was beginning. She was about to meet the empire her grandmother had built for her and the woman who had been protecting it. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Victoria thought about Richard's text message. He would arrive at their house at 6 o'clock, expecting to find a defeated housewife ready to sign his settlement papers. Instead, he would find that his boring, predictable wife had just taken control of a business empire worth more than his wildest dreams. Richard Sterling had spent 15 years stealing from Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter. Tonight, he was going to discover what happened when Victoria Montenegro Sterling decided to fight back. The elevator doors opened, and Victoria stepped into her new life as one of the most powerful women in Atlantic City. Behind her, the old Victoria disappeared forever, leaving only Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter and the empire that had been waiting for her to claim it. Margaret Chen's voice was sharper than usual when she called Victoria the next morning. Victoria was standing in the penthouse office of Montenegro's Grand Casino, looking out over Atlantic City with new eyes, when her phone rang. Victoria, we have a problem. Richard's attorney is pushing for an immediate settlement conference. They want to finalize the divorce next week, before you have time to properly evaluate your assets. Victoria watched the morning crowd moving along the boardwalk below. Casino employees, tourists, business people starting their day in the empire her grandmother had built. Let them push. Margaret, I'm ready for a settlement conference. Victoria, I don't think you understand the pressure they're applying. Richard's attorney is claiming you're being unreasonable, that you're trying to delay the proceedings for vindictive reasons. The judge might force a quick resolution if we can't demonstrate legitimate grounds for more time. Victoria smiled, thinking about the documents in her briefcase that proved her ownership of 3 casinos. Margaret, I think we'll be fine. How quickly can you prepare a complete financial disclosure of my assets? Your assets, Victoria? We've been through this. The prenuptial agreement limits your claims to, Margaret. I'm not talking about claims against Richard's assets. I'm talking about my assets, the ones he's been hiding from me for 15 years. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for several seconds. Victoria, what exactly have you discovered? I'll explain everything when I see you. Can you meet me in Atlantic City this afternoon? Atlantic City, Victoria? What are you doing in Atlantic City? I'm visiting my casinos. Victoria ended the call and turned to face Patricia Santos, the woman who had been running Montenegro Enterprises for the past 10 years. Patricia was a strong woman in her 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of competence that reminded Victoria of her grandmother's photographs. Mrs. Sterling, I've been waiting to meet you for a very long time. Your grandmother talked about you constantly. She was so proud of you, even though she worried about your situation. Patricia, please call me Victoria, and thank you for taking such good care of my grandmother's businesses. I'm sorry I didn't know about any of this until now. Patricia's expression grew concerned. Victoria, there are some things we need to discuss about the business operations. I've been filing reports with your husband's office for years, but I've never received responses to my questions about some of the financial decisions being made. Victoria settled into the leather chair behind the massive oak desk that had belonged to her grandmother. The office felt right somehow, like putting on clothes that had been tailored specifically for her. What kind of questions? Over the past 5 years, approximately $15 million has been transferred out of our operating accounts to Sterling Enterprises. Your husband's representatives told me these were investments in expanding casino operations, but I've never seen any expansion plans or received any documentation about what the money was used for. Victoria felt her anger building again. $15 million in the past 5 years alone. Richard had been systematically draining her businesses to fund his failing company. Patricia, what would happen if I wanted to recall those investments immediately? If Sterling Enterprises can't return the money, we could file lawsuits for recovery. But Victoria, there's something else you need to know. I've been receiving inquiries from potential buyers about whether Montenegro Enterprises might be for sale. What kind of buyers? Casino management companies, investment groups, competitors looking to expand? The inquiries all come through intermediaries, but they're asking very specific questions about our operations, our profitability, our debt structure. Victoria understood immediately. Richard was preparing to sell her casinos to cover his business debts, the quick divorce, the pressure for immediate settlement, the systematic draining of casino funds. Richard was setting up a fire sale of her inheritance. Patricia, I want you to implement new security measures immediately. No money transfers, no operational changes, no discussions with potential buyers without my direct authorization. Of course. Victoria, can I ask what's happening with your marriage situation? Victoria looked out at the Atlantic Ocean, thinking about the woman she had been a week ago and the woman she was becoming. My husband is divorcing me to marry a younger woman. He thinks I'm a helpless housewife who will accept whatever settlement he offers. He's about to discover that he's been married to Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter for 25 years without really knowing who I was. Patricia smiled for the first time since Victoria had arrived. Your grandmother used to say that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who underestimate you because they think they know you. Victoria spent the afternoon touring her properties with Patricia. Montenegro's Grand was elegant and sophisticated, catering to high-end clients who appreciated luxury and discretion. Montenegro's palace was larger and more vibrant, popular with tourists and casual gamblers. Montenegro's boardwalk was the newest property, featuring restaurants and entertainment venues along with gaming. Each casino was profitable, well-managed, and staffed with employees who had worked for the company for years. Victoria met dealers, restaurant managers, security personnel, and administrative staff who all spoke of Eleanor Montenegro with respect and affection. Your grandmother created something special here, Patricia explained as they walked through the employee cafeteria at Montenegro's Grand. She treated workers well, provided good benefits, promoted from within. People were loyal to her because she was loyal to them. Victoria noticed the way employees looked at her, assessing whether she would continue her grandmother's traditions or change the culture that had made Montenegro Enterprises successful. At 5 o'clock, Victoria returned to the penthouse office to call Margaret Chen with her instructions for the settlement conference. Margaret, I want you to accept Richard's proposal for a quick resolution. Tell his attorney that I'm ready to settle immediately. Victoria, I think you're making a mistake. We need more time too. Margaret, trust me on this. I want you to schedule the settlement conference for tomorrow afternoon, and I want you to bring the financial disclosure documents I'm sending you. What financial disclosure documents? The ones that show I'm worth approximately $100 million in casino assets. Plus, I have legitimate claims for recovery of another $120 million that my husband has stolen from me over the past 15 years. The silence on Margaret's end of the phone was profound. Victoria, please tell me you're not making this up. Margaret, I'm sending you documentation right now. And I want you to invite the press to the settlement conference. I think the story of Richard Sterling's financial manipulations will be very interesting to business reporters. You want to invite the press to your divorce settlement? Victoria looked at the photographs of her grandmother lining the office walls. Eleanor Montenegro had built an empire through intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. Now it was Victoria's turn to use those same qualities. Margaret, my husband has been stealing from me for 15 years while making me think I was dependent on his generosity. He's planning to divorce me quickly so he can steal the rest of my inheritance before I discover what I own. And he's bringing his pregnant girlfriend to our house tonight to pick up his golf clubs, like our marriage was just a minor inconvenience. Victoria's voice grew stronger as she spoke. I want Richard Sterling destroyed. I want his business empire exposed as a fraud built with stolen money. I want his new girlfriend to understand exactly what kind of man she's marrying, and I want every woman in America to know what can happen when you trust the wrong man with your financial security. Margaret's voice was admiring when she responded. Victoria, I think I'm beginning to understand why your grandmother left you a casino empire. Tomorrow afternoon, Margaret, make sure Richard knows that his boring, predictable wife is ready to settle quickly and quietly. Victoria ended the call and walked to the window overlooking the Atlantic City boardwalk. Tomorrow, Richard would discover that his carefully planned theft had failed. His business would be exposed as fraudulent. His new relationship would be destroyed by scandal, and his ex-wife would emerge as one of the most powerful women in the casino industry. Richard Sterling had bet everything on his ability to control and deceive Victoria Montenegro Sterling. Tomorrow, he would learn that he had been playing against the house, and the house always won. The family court judge called the case of Sterling versus Sterling at precisely 9 o'clock Tuesday morning. Victoria sat beside Margaret Chen at the plaintiff's table, wearing a navy blue suit that had belonged to her grandmother and carrying a briefcase filled with documents that would destroy Richard's carefully constructed lies. Richard entered the courtroom with his expensive legal team, his confidence evident in every gesture. He wore his best charcoal suit and his lucky cufflinks, the ones Victoria had given him for their 10th anniversary. Amanda sat in the gallery behind him, her engagement ring catching the morning light as she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. Your Honor, Richard's attorney began, my client is prepared to offer a very generous settlement to expedite these proceedings. Mrs. Sterling will receive $20,000 monthly in alimony for 5 years, plus half the equity in the marital home. We believe this is more than fair given the prenuptial agreement and Mrs. Sterling's limited contributions to the marital assets. Victoria watched Richard's face as his attorney spoke. He looked satisfied, confident that his boring, predictable wife would accept this settlement and disappear quietly from his life. He had no idea that Victoria Montenegro Sterling was about to introduce him to his worst nightmare. Judge Harrison was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had heard every possible variation of marital deception. She turned to Victoria with a questioning look. Mrs. Sterling, does this settlement offer seem acceptable to you? Victoria stood slowly, her voice clear and steady. Your Honor, I'd like to present new evidence that significantly changes the financial picture of this marriage. Richard's confident expression flickered for just a moment before returning to its previous smugness. His attorney leaned forward with interest, probably expecting Victoria to produce evidence of some minor asset Richard had forgotten to disclose. Margaret Chen opened her briefcase and handed a thick folder to the judge. Your Honor, Mrs. Sterling has recently discovered that she is the sole owner of Montenegro Enterprises, a casino operation in Atlantic City valued at approximately $100 million. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Richard's face went white as he turned to stare at Victoria, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Furthermore, Margaret continued, Mrs. Sterling has evidence that her husband has been systematically stealing from her inheritance for 15 years, using casino profits to fund his own business ventures without her knowledge or consent. Judge Harrison raised her hand for silence. Mrs. Sterling, you're claiming ownership of casino properties worth $100 million? Yes, Your Honor. Properties that my grandmother Eleanor Montenegro left to me 15 years ago, which my husband has been controlling and exploiting while keeping me ignorant of their existence. Richard finally found his voice. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. Victoria has never shown any interest in business affairs. She's always been content to let me handle financial matters. Because you told me there were no significant financial matters to handle, Victoria replied, her voice carrying across the courtroom with surprising strength. Because you intercepted every communication from my grandmother's estate and convinced me that I had inherited nothing of value. Margaret handed additional documents to the judge. Your Honor, these are copies of letters sent to Mrs. Sterling on her 30th, 40th, and 50th birthdays by the estate attorney, explaining her inheritance. Mrs. Sterling never received these letters because her husband intercepted them. Amanda stood up in the gallery, her voice sharp with panic. Richard, what is she talking about? You said she didn't have any money of her own? Judge Harrison's gaze moved to Amanda. Miss, please sit down. You're not a party to these proceedings. But Amanda remained standing, her face pale as she stared at Richard. You told me she was completely dependent on you financially. You said the divorce would be simple because she had no resources to fight. Richard's attorney was frantically whispering in his ear, but Richard seemed unable to focus on anything except the documents being presented to the judge. Your Honor, and Margaret continued, we have financial records showing that approximately $120 million in casino profits have been transferred to Sterling Enterprises over the past 15 years. Money that legally belonged to Mrs. Sterling, but was taken without her knowledge. Victoria watched Amanda's face as the magnitude of Richard's deception became clear. The younger woman had thought she was marrying a successful businessman who would provide her with security and status. Instead, she was marrying a man whose business empire was built on stolen money. Richard? Amanda's voice cut through the courtroom noise. Is this true? Have you been using her money to fund your business? Amanda, please. It's complicated, Richard began. But Amanda was already gathering her purse and heading for the exit. Don't call me, she said over her shoulder. My father's attorney will be in touch about the wedding contracts we signed. Judge Harrison watched Amanda leave, then turned her attention back to the case at hand. Mr. Sterling, how do you respond to these allegations? Richard's attorney stood, his composure finally cracking. Your Honor, my client has been acting as Mrs. Sterling's financial representative for 15 years. All decisions were made in her best interests. In my best interests, Victoria's voice rose with genuine indignation. Stealing my inheritance was in my best interest. Using my money to fund your failing business while giving me an allowance like a child was in my best interest. Margaret handed the judge another document. Your Honor, we have evidence that Sterling Enterprises is essentially bankrupt and has been surviving on stolen casino funds. Mr. Sterling was planning to use this divorce to gain direct control of the casino properties to cover his business debts. Richard finally stood, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Victoria, you don't understand business. You never wanted to be involved in financial decisions. I was protecting you from complications you couldn't handle. I couldn't handle them, or you needed me not to handle them. Victoria's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with 15 years of suppressed anger. Did it never occur to you that I might want to know I owned a business empire? That I might want to meet the employees who work for companies my grandmother built? That I might want to honor her legacy instead of letting you steal it? Judge Harrison called for a brief recess, but the damage was already done. The gallery was full of reporters who had been alerted to the unusual nature of the settlement conference, and they were frantically taking notes as Richard's empire crumbled in real time. When court resumed, Richard's attorney announced that his client needed time to review the new financial disclosures before proceeding with settlement negotiations. Your Honor, Margaret responded, Mrs. Sterling is prepared to proceed immediately. She's requesting full control of her inheritance, recovery of all funds improperly transferred to Sterling Enterprises, and appropriate spousal support from Mr. Sterling given his 15-year theft of her assets. Victoria stood one final time, looking directly at Richard across the courtroom. Your Honor, I spent 25 years believing I was married to a successful, honorable man who was taking care of me. Instead, I was married to a thief who was systematically stealing my inheritance while making me grateful for his generosity. I want everything that belongs to me, and I want restitution for everything he's taken. Richard stared back at her, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman he had actually been married to all these years. Not the boring, predictable housewife he had dismissed, but Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter, and she was magnificent in her fury. Judge Harrison called another recess, but Victoria had already won. Richard's world was crumbling. Amanda was gone, and everyone in that courtroom knew that the boring housewife had just destroyed the millionaire ex-husband who had underestimated her for the last time. As Victoria walked out of the courtroom with Margaret, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. She felt powerful, she felt in control, and she felt like her grandmother would be very proud of the woman she had finally become. 2 hours later, Richard approached Victoria in the courthouse hallway, his lawyer notably absent and his confident facade completely demolished. Amanda was nowhere to be seen, having left the building immediately after learning the truth about her fiancé's financial crimes. "Victoria, we need to talk." Richard's voice carried none of its usual commanding tone. He looked older somehow, deflated by the public exposure of his carefully constructed lies. 25 years too late for talking? Richard. Victoria stood with Margaret beside the courthouse windows, sunlight streaming through to illuminate the documents that had just destroyed her husband's empire. "Look, I know you're angry, but we can work this out privately. There's no need to drag this through a public trial. Think about what this will do to both our reputations." Victoria studied the man she had loved and trusted for half her adult life, even now caught red-handed in theft and deception. Richard was trying to manipulate her into protecting him from the consequences of his actions. "My reputation. Richard, I'm about to become known as the woman who inherited a casino empire and took down her crooked ex-husband. I think I'll be fine." Richard's face flushed with desperation. "Victoria, you don't understand the business world. Those casinos need experienced management. Without my oversight, you'll lose everything within a year. The way you've been losing everything with Sterling Enterprises, the company that's been surviving on my stolen money for the past 15 years? Margaret Chen stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. "Mr. Sterling, my client is prepared to be reasonable. Return every dollar you've stolen from Montenegro Enterprises. Agree to a complete audit of your business finances, and we'll consider not pressing criminal charges for embezzlement." Richard's composure finally cracked completely. "Criminal charges, Victoria? You can't be serious. We were married. Married couples share assets. Married couples share assets they know about. Richard, you deliberately hid my inheritance while stealing from it. That's not sharing. That's theft." Behind Richard, Victoria could see Amanda's family members arriving at the courthouse. The Chen family had apparently heard about the morning's revelations and come to assess the damage to their daughter's engagement to a man whose business empire was built on stolen casino money. Amanda's father, David Chen, approached with two men in expensive suits who looked like attorneys. Victoria recognized him from society photographs, a successful restaurateur who had built his own legitimate fortune. "Mr. Sterling?" David Chen's voice was ice cold. "My daughter tells me there are some financial irregularities we need to discuss." Richard turned to face the Chen family delegation, his face pale with panic. "David, I can explain everything. This is just a misunderstanding between Victoria and me. A misunderstanding involving $100 million in casino assets and 15 years of theft." David Chen's attorney stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling, we've reviewed the wedding contracts your fiancé signed. There are significant financial guarantees that appear to be fraudulent given today's revelations." Victoria watched Richard's remaining support system crumble in real time. Amanda was gone. Her family was pursuing him for fraud, and his business partners were probably receiving phone calls from reporters asking about Sterling Enterprises' financial stability. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled. "Victoria, the business reporters are already running the story. Casino Heiress exposes husband's 15-year theft is trending on financial news sites." Richard's phone began ringing incessantly. Victoria could see the panic in his eyes as he realized that his professional reputation was being destroyed as thoroughly as his personal life. "Victoria, please. You know me. I'm not a criminal. I was trying to build something for our future." "Whose future, Richard?" "The future you were planning with Amanda. The future that required you to steal my inheritance and divorce me before I found out what you had done." Patricia Santos appeared at the end of the hallway, walking briskly toward Victoria with a folder in her hands. She had driven up from Atlantic City as soon as Margaret called with news of the settlement conference. "Victoria, I have the preliminary audit results you requested." Patricia's voice carried the satisfaction of someone whose concerns had finally been validated. "Sterling Enterprises owes Montenegro Enterprises approximately $47 million in misappropriated funds, plus interest." Richard stared at Patricia in horror. "You can't prove that money was misappropriated. Those were legitimate business investments." "In a company that's bankrupt?" Patricia's voice was sharp with years of frustration. "Mr. Sterling, I've been asking for documentation of these investments for 5 years. You never provided any because they don't exist." David Chen's attorney stepped closer to Richard. "Mr. Sterling, we're going to need a complete accounting of your assets before we proceed with any discussions about the wedding contracts. There's not going to be a wedding, Victoria said quietly. Amanda made that clear when she walked out of the courtroom. Richard looked around the hallway at the faces surrounding him. Victoria, powerful and confident in her grandmother's suit. Margaret Chen, sharp and relentless in pursuit of justice. Patricia Santos, protective of the business empire she had been safeguarding. David Chen's legal team, calculating the damage to their family's reputation. What do you want from me? Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. Victoria thought about her grandmother's letters, about the 25 years she had spent believing herself dependent on a man who was stealing from her, about the employees of Montenegro Enterprises who had been wondering when Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter would finally come home. I want you to return every dollar you stole from me. I want you to publicly acknowledge that Sterling Enterprises was built with stolen casino funds, and I want you to disappear from my life completely. Richard's phone rang again. This time, he answered it with shaking hands. Richard Sterling, his voice cracked as he listened to whoever was calling. Yes, I understand. I'll be there as soon as possible. He ended the call and looked at Victoria with something that might have been respect for the first time in their marriage. That was my business partner. The banks are calling our loans. Sterling Enterprises will be in bankruptcy by the end of the week. Victoria felt no satisfaction in Richard's destruction, only a deep sense of justice finally being served. I'm sorry it came to this. Richard, I'm sorry you chose to steal from me instead of simply telling me the truth about my inheritance. Would you have stayed married to me if you had known you were worth more than I was? Victoria considered the question seriously. I don't know, but you never gave me the chance to find out. Did you? Richard walked away down the courthouse hallway, his phone ringing again and again as his world continued to collapse. Victoria watched him go, feeling oddly peaceful for the first time in months. Margaret Chen placed a gentle hand on Victoria's arm. How do you feel? Victoria looked out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about the casinos waiting for her in Atlantic City, the employees who had protected her grandmother's legacy, and the life she was about to build as the woman she had always been, but never known she could become. I feel like Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter, Victoria said, and I feel like it's time to go home. 6 months later, Victoria stood at the podium of the Women's Business Leadership Conference in Philadelphia, looking out at an audience of 300 women who had come to hear her story. The conference theme was Finding Strength After Betrayal, and Victoria's speech had been the most requested session of the weekend. When I was 52 years old, Victoria began, her voice clear and confident, I discovered that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I thought I was a dependent housewife whose millionaire ex-husband was generously supporting me. Instead, I was a casino owner whose husband had been stealing from me for 15 years. The audience leaned forward with intense attention. Victoria had learned that her story resonated with women across the country who had discovered their own versions of betrayal and financial manipulation. I want to talk today about the difference between the woman I was and the woman I became, and how sometimes our greatest disasters can reveal our greatest strengths. Victoria looked out at faces of women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. Professionals, entrepreneurs, mothers, wives, divorcees, women who had built their own empires, and women who were just beginning to understand their own power. My grandmother Eleanor Montenegro started with nothing and built a casino empire worth over $100 million. She did this as a single woman in an industry dominated by men, at a time when women had few legal protections and even fewer opportunities. Victoria clicked to a slide showing her grandmother's photograph from the opening of Montenegro's Grand Casino. Eleanor understood something that took me 52 years to learn: women need to own things, not just live off the generosity of others. She built Montenegro Enterprises not just for herself, but as a legacy for the women who would come after her. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Victoria, how did you find the courage to fight back when you discovered the truth? Victoria smiled, thinking about that moment in the courthouse when she had finally understood who she really was. I realized that I had been living someone else's idea of who I should be, instead of discovering who I actually was. The woman who accepted $15,000 a month as an allowance was playing a role. The woman who owned 3 casinos was the real me. Victoria advanced to the next slide, showing Montenegro's boardwalk casino during its recent expansion. Today, Montenegro Enterprises employs over 800 people and generates $12 million in annual profit. We've expanded our restaurant operations, opened a boutique hotel, and just broke ground on our fourth casino property. The audience erupted in applause. Victoria had become something of a celebrity in business circles, featured on magazine covers and quoted in articles about women's financial independence after 50. But the most important thing I've learned is that our power doesn't come from the money we inherit or the businesses we own. Our power comes from understanding that we deserve to control our own destinies. Victoria moved away from the podium, walking closer to the audience as her voice became more personal. 6 months ago, my ex-husband Richard was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. Sterling Enterprises was dissolved, its assets sold to pay creditors. Amanda Chen married someone else within 3 months of our divorce, and she's now pregnant with her new husband's child. A ripple of satisfaction moved through the audience. Victoria had learned that women particularly enjoyed the part of her story where everyone got exactly what they deserved. But I don't tell you this because I want you to focus on revenge. I tell you this because I want you to focus on justice. There's a difference between destroying someone out of anger and simply refusing to let them continue hurting you. Victoria returned to the podium for her closing remarks. Today, I'm not just the owner of Montenegro Enterprises. I'm the chairwoman of the Montenegro Foundation, which provides microloans to women starting their own businesses. I'm on the board of directors of 3 other casino companies, helping to bring more women into leadership positions in the gaming industry. And I'm working with legislators to strengthen laws protecting women from financial abuse in marriage. Victoria looked out at the audience, seeing her own journey reflected in their faces. The woman who accepted Richard's settlement offer would have walked away with $20,000 a month for 5 years. The woman who fought back recovered $120 million in stolen assets and built a business empire that will support hundreds of families for generations. An older woman in the back row stood up. What advice would you give to women who suspect their husbands might be hiding assets or controlling their finances? Victoria's expression grew serious. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Get copies of tax returns, bank statements, investment accounts. Never sign documents you don't understand. And remember that in a true partnership, your spouse wants you to understand your financial situation, not remain ignorant of it. Margaret Chen, who was sitting in the front row, smiled at Victoria's practical advice. Margaret had become not just Victoria's attorney, but her friend and business partner, helping to structure the Montenegro Foundation's legal framework. Most importantly, Victoria continued, remember that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. I was 52 when I discovered I was Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter. Some of you might be older, some younger. The age doesn't matter. What matters is the decision to stop accepting other people's definitions of who you are. The audience rose in a standing ovation as Victoria concluded her speech. During the question and answer session that followed, woman after woman shared stories of financial abuse, hidden assets, and the challenge of rebuilding after betrayal. After the conference ended, Victoria drove to Atlantic City for her weekly management meeting with Patricia Santos. The drive had become a meditation for her, a transition between her public role as a motivational speaker and her private role as a casino executive. Montenegro's Grand Casino looked exactly as it had when her grandmother built it, but Victoria had added touches that reflected her own vision. The employee break rooms had been renovated with comfortable furniture and natural light. The training programs had been expanded to help workers advance within the company. The profit-sharing plan ensured that Montenegro's success benefited everyone who contributed to it. Victoria found Patricia in the penthouse office, reviewing the quarterly reports with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been vindicated. The fourth quarter numbers are excellent, Patricia reported. Revenue is up 18% over last year, and employee satisfaction surveys show the highest ratings in company history. Victoria settled into her grandmother's chair, which no longer felt too big for her. She had grown into Eleanor Montenegro's legacy while making it her own. Any word from the investigators about Richard's hidden assets? The federal marshals recovered another $2 million from offshore accounts yesterday. They're estimating total recovery of about 60% of what was stolen. Victoria nodded. She had learned to be satisfied with justice rather than perfect restoration. Some of the money Richard had stolen was gone forever, spent on his lifestyle and failed business ventures. But Montenegro Enterprises was stronger than ever, and the recovered funds had been reinvested in expansion and employee benefits. Patricia, I want to discuss the scholarship program we talked about. The Eleanor Montenegro Business Scholarships for Women Over 40. Exactly, and I want to fund full MBA programs for women who are starting over after divorce or job loss. Women who discover at midlife that they need to rebuild their careers from scratch. Patricia smiled. Your grandmother would love that. She always said the most dangerous thing a woman could do was depend entirely on someone else for her security. Victoria walked to the window overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, thinking about the path that had brought her from dependent housewife to casino mogul in less than a year. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom Rodriguez, the private investigator who had become a close friend. Saw your speech online. Eleanor would be proud. Victoria looked at the framed photograph of her grandmother that now sat prominently on the desk. Eleanor Montenegro at 75, still sharp and commanding at the opening of her final casino expansion. Another text, this one from Mrs. Patterson at the library. Dear, saw you on the news again. So proud of how you've honored your grandmother's legacy. Victoria had learned that her transformation had inspired not just the women at business conferences, but people throughout her community who had watched a seemingly helpless housewife become a powerful entrepreneur. The phone rang, and Victoria recognized the number of a reporter from Forbes magazine who was working on a feature about women in the casino industry. Ms. Sterling, I wanted to follow up on our interview about the Montenegro Foundation. Can you tell me about your long-term vision for supporting women entrepreneurs? Victoria looked out at the lights of Atlantic City beginning to sparkle in the early evening darkness. Each light represented someone working, dreaming, building something for their family's future. The foundation exists because my grandmother understood that women need more than just inspiration. We need capital, mentorship, and legal protection. We're planning to expand the microloan program nationally and add educational components about financial literacy and business planning. And what about your personal plans? Any thoughts of remarriage? Victoria smiled at the question she was asked in every interview. I'm focused on building something that will last beyond my lifetime. Romance isn't off the table forever, but right now I'm discovering what it means to be completely independent for the first time in my adult life. After the interview ended, Victoria remained in the office as night fell over Atlantic City. She had dinner plans with Patricia and the other senior managers, a monthly tradition that had replaced the lonely dinners she used to eat in Westchester County while waiting for Richard to come home. Victoria gathered her briefcase and prepared to leave the office that had become the center of her new life. Tomorrow, she would review expansion plans for Montenegro's 5th casino. Next week, she would testify before a congressional committee about financial abuse in marriage. Next month, she would speak at another conference about women's economic empowerment, but tonight she would have dinner with friends who respected her intelligence, valued her leadership, and never made her feel like she needed to apologize for her success. As Victoria walked through the casino floor toward the restaurant where her team was waiting, she noticed the way employees greeted her with genuine warmth. She had become the kind of leader her grandmother had been demanding but fair, ambitious but ethical, powerful but never cruel. Victoria paused at the entrance to Montenegro's grand restaurant, looking back at the casino floor her grandmother had designed and she had inherited. The sounds of conversation, laughter, and gaming filled the air with the energy of people pursuing their dreams and taking calculated risks. This was her world now. Not the controlled environment of Westchester County where she had been kept safe and ignorant, but the dynamic, challenging world of business where success depended on intelligence, courage, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Victoria walked into the restaurant where Patricia and the management team were waiting, ready to discuss the future of Montenegro Enterprises and plan the next phase of expansion. She was Eleanor Montenegro's granddaughter, and she was exactly where she belonged. As she joined her colleagues at the table, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her from devastating betrayal to triumphant self-discovery. The woman who had stood frozen behind the French doors of the country club no longer existed. In her place was Victoria Montenegro Sterling, casino owner, foundation chairwoman, and living proof that it's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. The conversation flowed around the table as the team discussed quarterly reports, expansion plans, and employee initiatives. Victoria listened to the voices of people who had become her chosen family, people who valued her contributions and respected her leadership. Outside the restaurant windows, the Atlantic Ocean stretched toward the horizon, eternal and ever-changing like the possibilities that lay ahead. Victoria had lost a husband but found herself, lost a marriage but gained an empire, lost her illusions but discovered her strength, and that, she realized, was the most valuable inheritance of all.